Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Fox, and I work in the Financial Aid Office at Central Penn. And this is just an overview of the financial aid facts for the 22-23 financial aid year. So where to begin? The first thing you need to do is complete the FSA ID and password, not only for just the student, but for also a parent or both parents. You'll go to studentaid.gov and you'll find this is where all the financial aid information is now stored. They've combined everything into one website. And when you create an account, you will click on create a username and a password. When you're creating this username and password, you need a valid email address and a cell phone number. And I always tell families, do not allow the student to use their school email address because this is going to carry them throughout their college career. And a lot of times high schools actually turn off that high school address once they graduate. When you're working on your password, do not use your name or birthday. It will automatically be disregarded. So you need to have a username and a password, a valid email address, and a cell phone number. Once you enter that information in, the FSA ID will actually both email and text you a code to verify that that is your information. And then once that's done, typically within 1 to 3 business days, they'll validate your information with the Social Security Administration, and you are ready to start the financial aid process. So the Fafsa form, the dreaded Fafsa form, it's the free application for federal student aid. And again, our favorite website, studentaid.gov, although we do tell students and families, if you are planning to use a cell phone or an iPad, that make sure you download the My Student Aid app. It is much simpler than trying to do studentaid.gov on a device. But if you're on a laptop or on a desk computer, studentaid.gov works just perfectly. I can't emphasize enough that you should never pay to complete the Fafsa form. A lot of times you'll get mailings, especially because your parents have seniors, about pay $150 and we'll do the Fafsa for you. The issue is sometimes not the Fafsa form, but all the paperwork that you're going to have to turn into the financial aid office, and they're not going to help you with that. So don't pay them money to complete the Fafsa form. Call the financial aid office so that we can help you for free. You are going to be completing the 22-23 FAFSA because your students are going to be starting college after July 1st of 2022. So this is just an idea of what it looks like. So when you log in, you'll click on create an account when you're creating your FSA ID and password. And then when you have your FSA ID and password, you will enter them here and hit login to start the process. So what goes on this Fafsa form? Well, this year, it's your 2020 tax information. So we get a lot of questions about, well, whose information? So if the student lives in one household, then we're looking for that household income information to include step parents. So if the student lives with mom and stepdad, it's not just mom's information that goes on the FAFSA, it's mom and stepdad. Again, we're looking for the household. If there's joint custody, we recommend using the parent who supports the child more than 50%. We also get a lot of questions about independent status. Hey, my kiddo graduated high school and they're planning on moving out, so we'd like to apply for them to be an independent student. Well, unfortunately, if the student doesn't meet the below criteria, they are not considered independent. So they need to at least be 24. A veteran or active duty, enrolled in a graduate or professional program, which is not an associate's or a bachelor's degree, married, have children or legal dependents that the student supports, not you as the parent, or an orphan or ward of the court, emancipated youth, or homeless, which would be documented in the guidance office at the high school. So what all goes on this FAFSA form? Everyone wants to know. It's not as bad as you think. Student demographics, piece of cake. Your student knows all that. School selection. This is the fun part. Students can list up to 10 schools. And I always tell families, you can apply for the FAFSA form and list schools if you've never applied, if you've never even visited, if they've only mentioned the school in passing, it can't hurt. Although I will tell you, it is up to 10 schools. So if there's 25 schools the student is looking at, you've got to kind of pick the top 10, at least get award letters from them, take off some schools and add some schools. But most times 10 schools works out great for students. You're going to see those dependency status questions we just reviewed on the last slide. So the student has to go through and answer to see if they qualify for an independent status. Then it's going to be parent demographics. So parent's name, birth date, social. And then again, for this year, it's going to be the 2020 tax information. The IRS data retrieval tool. Financial aid offices, we love this tool because this really cuts down on the amount of paperwork that you as families have to turn into us. So a couple things they're going to ask you. Have you already completed your IRS income tax return for 2020? What is your filing status? If you are single and you filed single or head of household, you will qualify for the IRS data retrieval tool. If you're married and you filed married joint, you will qualify for the IRS data retrieval tool. But if you are married and you filed married filing separately, you're not going to qualify to use the IRS data retrieval tool because you can't pull two different tax returns onto one FAFSA form. So you will need to manually enter the information. What's great for students is since they logged in with their FSA ID and password, if they file taxes, they'll be able to automatically use the IRS data retrieval tool. Parents, you'll just have to enter the FSA ID and password that you already created so that you can use the IRS data retrieval tool. So what are some benefits of the tool? Why we love it so much is, again, it cuts down on the paperwork. So 30% of the people who apply for financial aid are randomly selected for verification, meaning you have some additional forms you need to complete for us. If you use the IRS data retrieval tool, that means you don't have to send us your taxes. And let's face it, when you get your tax packet back from your preparer, you do not know what we need in there. And really, we don't need as much as you're probably going to try and send us. So if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, you'll simply have to complete the verification worksheet and you will not have to send in taxes. But I do caution you, once in a while, we do need W-2s. So what are some tricks of the trade? What are things we've seen gone wrong so that you don't make those same mistakes? Answer every question on the FAFSA form, even if you think it's insignificant. There's a reason that they ask the question. So a lot of times, unfortunately, the FAFSA will let you submit without answering every question. So we'll get access to it. We'll go to process the aid, realize we're missing a question. I'll call you. You'll have to go back on the FAFSA, answer the question, submit it. It's going to take a couple of days for us to get access to it. And now the file's at the bottom of the pile. So it just extends how long you're waiting for your financial aid package. Make sure that you enter the high school name, city, and state. I can't tell you how many students are like, I'm done with high school. They don't need to know that. Like, I'm moving on to college, skip. Well, this information is vital for us to make sure that you get state grant information later. So again, I know it seems like, why do they care what high school I went to? But in Pennsylvania, they use that as part of the residency check to make sure that you are a Pennsylvania resident. So again, enter high school name, city, state, confirm it's your high school, and they give you the list and move on. Another question that stumps a lot of people is they ask if you're completed your first bachelor's degree, but we know you're so excited when you're filling out the FAFSA form that I think many families read it. Are you working on a bachelor's degree? And the families hit yes. Well, when you say yes to that, if you have a bachelor's degree already, you are not eligible for any grant funds. So when you get your award letter and it has no grants and you can't figure out why, and then you call us and we can't figure out why, it usually comes down to that question. So read it carefully. The students, they don't have a bachelor's degree. So the answer is no, even though we know that they're working on it. Another question that we get a lot is household size and number in college. Parents, I'm so sorry to tell you that you do not count in the number in college, even if you're taking full-time classes. Although I do want to tell you, parents, when you're completing your FAFSA for your school, you can list that your student is in college. So your household size and number in college went up, but for the student, theirs did not go up. Read each question. So FAFSA pre-populates a lot of questions with zeros, and families are like, this is great. FAFSA knows all of my financial information. Next, please. And we are like, stop. Read the questions. FAFSA has no idea. They're just throwing in some zeros there to make sure that something is in there. Read the questions. And if you don't understand what it's asking, it doesn't apply to you and it's zero. And maybe they are all zeros, but it is definitely worth looking into and reading the questions because again, it can make a difference in the financial aid package. And students, again, do not have to be accepted to submit the FAFSA form. I'll assume that most schools work just like ours. And once you make it through the enrollment and admissions process, now it's our turn in financial aid. And if we get your file from the admissions office and you have all your paperwork in already, the reality is you're getting your award letter a lot faster because we had everything we were waiting for already. I don't have the grant amounts yet for 22-23, especially since it just opened a week ago. However, I can tell you at least what it was for 21-22, just to kind of give you an idea. The federal Pell Grant this year ranged from $672 to $64.95. So what happens is once you complete the FAFSA form, you will receive what's called an expected family contribution. And if it ranged this year, at least between 0 and 58.46, you would qualify for a federal Pell Grant. Now, if you complete the FAFSA form and it says that you do not qualify for a federal Pell Grant, that does not mean that you might not qualify for a state FIA grant if you're a Pennsylvania resident and your child is looking at attending a Pennsylvania college. FIA determines the amount, not the schools, but don't despair about not being eligible for a Pell Grant. Then there's the FSEOG grant. So must be Pell Grant eligible, and each school kind of awards it differently. But again, funds are limited. So it is important to get this FAFSA submitted now so you're qualifying for maximum financial aid packages. FIA. So as Pennsylvania residents, as long as you've been here for at least a year, especially if your student is considering a Pennsylvania college, I cannot emphasize how important it is to get the FAFSA completed before May 1st. And it's October 7th. So plenty of time to get this in. In fact, I highly recommend getting it done this month, just so it's off your to-do list. So FIA, they require the FAFSA is submitted by May 1st each year. If you file the FAFSA on May 2nd and you qualify, you will not receive it. Again, hard deadline. Please make sure you get this FAFSA submitted. Deadlines are key. So when the student completes the FAFSA form, they're going to list an email on the FAFSA. This is how FIA is going to communicate with them. So it's good now to make sure that your students are checking their email. They need to get in this habit for college anyway, but FIA will email them a link to this aessuccess.org website. They'll click on it, they'll create an account, they'll answer some residency questions, and then once that's submitted, we will get the state grant information in May and add that grant. As a side note, and I'm sure most schools do this, we know you can't just sit out there wondering what the state grant will be when we're packaging financial aid 7 months beforehand. So you'll probably get estimates from schools when you see that. So you might see FIA with an asterisk. That's what we usually do. We know it's an estimate. We're pretty close. We're pretty conservative too. So if anything, you would see an increase in the state grant when we actually get the funds in May. Student loans. So I know at my school, student loans are reality for most students. So I like to kind of take this opportunity to review what student loans are and kind of let parents know what to expect if you plan to go through the student loan process. Our favorite website, studentaid.gov, is where students would apply for it. They sign in again with that FSA ID and password they created. There's two portions of these student loans. We have the entrance counseling, and this is a test. It makes sure that the student understands they're borrowing money and this money needs paid back, and the ramifications of not paying it back, like garnishing wages, tax returns, things like that. So it's important information, especially because for most students, this is going to be their first loan or first dealings with debt. Once that is completed, then they'll complete the master promissory note where they sign off saying that, yes, I understand I'm borrowing money and I do promise to pay this back. A side note for the master promissory note is the student does not have to be 18 to sign this. So don't wait. So don't think, oh, the whole financial aid process is done except for those loans because my kiddo doesn't turn 18 until April. Nope, get it done. It's guaranteed to them going to school. So even if they would start school when they're 17, they can still get a federal student loan. So let's talk about the different types of student loans. They're subsidized and unsubsidized. So once your student completes their loan, the entrance counseling and master promissory note, the school will then send them an award letter, which will list these types of loans. So if it says subsidized loans, this means that the government pays the interest while they're enrolled. And if it says unsubsidized, the student is responsible for the interest while they're enrolled. They do not have to pay the interest, but we highly recommend if you can that you do. Again, no payments on federal student loans until 6 months after they graduate or stop attending. But if you're able to make any interest payments, it can make a big difference in the long run. We also get a lot of questions about amounts of student loans. So you just got your tuition bill, it's $10,000. Great, sign me up for a $10,000 student loan is what our parents say. And boy, do we wish in financial aid that was the case, but it's not, unfortunately. So the government limits how much students can borrow. So $5,500 for a freshman dependent student. We went over all the dependency status stuff already. So, and then as they progress through their degree, they can qualify for additional student loan money. So before I go into parent loans, I do like to kind of remind parents. So let's say you get the award letter and you realize that you owe $5,000 for the year, and you think maybe, oh, I might be able to do this without getting more debt. Definitely check with the financial aid office or even the business office, the bursar's office at the school to see what payment plan options are available. Because obviously, if you don't have to go into debt, that's great. If you can handle the payment plan, some schools do 10 months, some schools do a whole year, some do by semester. So again, it's definitely something to take a look at if you think you may be able to pay some out of pocket. But if you get the remaining balance and you realize you can't pay it out of pocket, or you talk to the business office, the bursar's office, and realize you can't pay it out of pocket either, that's when we go into the next portion of this, which is parent loans and private loans. So parent loans are through the federal government. It's the Parent Plus loan. This is a loan in the parent's name only. You can't transfer it to the student. It will never be in the student's name. When they graduate, they can't take this from you. They can help you make payments, of course, but they cannot pay this loan back. It will be on your credit report. Payments are all credited under you. So yes, they can help, but just know you are not getting this loan out of your name. There is an interest rate cap. Currently, it's at 6.28%. Again, this year, things change every year, just kind of giving you an idea of where it stands currently. They highly encourage that repayment begin while the student's enrolled once the school starts receiving the disbursements. However, you can defer payments while the student is enrolled. It's a credit check. So if you pass the credit check and you're willing to borrow, you can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus the financial aid. So what does that mean? So we talked about a $10,000 bill. Now your student has a $5,500 student loan. So you still have $4,500 left to figure out. But then you realize, oh, we need books and a computer. So you can borrow additional money in your Parent Plus loan to help with those remaining balance. So instead of borrowing $4,500, maybe you borrow $6,000. You can't borrow $25,000, but you definitely can borrow a little bit extra to help with some of those educational expenses. If they run the credit check and you're denied and you're not eligible, the student then does get an additional $4,000 of the unsubsidized student loan, the one where the student's responsible for the interest while they're in school, because the parent wasn't eligible to borrow a Parent Plus loan. So let's say you decide, I think I'm going to try for this Parent Plus loan. Same website, your new favorite one, studentaid.gov. You as the parent this time will log in with the parent FSA ID and password, and you will submit a Plus application. And this is where you list how you want to pay this back, if you want to start paying it while they're in school, if you want to defer, and how much you want to borrow. And again, it doesn't hurt to reach out to the financial aid office to talk through how much they think you should borrow. If you submit the application and it's approved, great. You'll know immediately if it's approved or denied. But let's say it's approved and you're like, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to borrow this or not. You're not obligated to it until you submit the Plus Master Promissory Note. So you can step back, log off, take a second to think about it, and then complete, decide that maybe you do want to do it. You can log back in a month, 2 months later and complete the Plus Master Promissory Note before the school processes it. You can be approved for the Plus loan, decide you never want it, and it just goes away. As long as you don't complete the Master Promissory Note, the schools will not process it for you. Private loans, excuse me. So let's say you decide, oh, I wasn't really planning on borrowing the Plus loan in my name for my student's education. I was kind of hoping we'd be in this together. Or maybe you don't get approved for the Plus loan. The student can borrow a private loan with any creditworthy cosigner. It doesn't have to be the parent. So you can go to the website, the student signs in, they complete their application, and then they can add the cosigner. The only thing we would say is watch the interest rates and the fee structures. So knowing what the Plus interest rate is, again, if you get approved for a private loan and it's at 12%, we need to have a conversation kind of about how, the interest rate can really impact how much you're paying back. So just keep that in mind, really just watch that, because that's the one thing we at the school, we don't really see your interest rate. So it's hard for us to help you through that process unless you involve us. Definitely ask the college who they recommend. So really, you can get a loan from anywhere. It doesn't matter where, as long as they're willing to lend to you attending whatever school that your child is looking at attending. So that's completely up to you, but it doesn't hurt to ask the college, and they can usually kind of guide you one way or the other. Typically, it does require additional documentation though. So you're not going to know instantly if it's approved or denied. You're going to need to, upload your W-2s or driver's license, and then you'll know within 24 hours if it's approved or denied. I always tell families, please tell me who you're using on a private loan so I can watch for it to come through. The reality is the private lender will let the school know when the loan's ready, and we'll get that process for you right away. Work study. So every school handles work study differently, but work study is work study. It's financial aid based. So it's based off of the financial aid package that we're giving you. Some schools package up the work study right onto the award letter, and you'll see immediately what the student could qualify for should they be willing to do work study on campus. Some schools pay students. They get paychecks every other week so that, they see the money. You don't see the money. You don't really see that financial aid benefit, but the student is getting some extra cash in their pocket. Typically, it's minimum wage with limited hours. If the student goes to the financial aid office and finds they're not eligible, or they're just eligible for so minimal hours, doesn't feel worth it, definitely check and see if there's any part-time jobs on campus. I am going to put a little plug in for work study here. I really believe in either work study or part-time jobs. A lot of times, especially for new students, we're way flexible. We're student-based. So if a student comes in and says, oh, I've got this big test I'm so stressed out about, then go study for the test. You can file for us later. So again, I'm pro work study, but I do understand that it is limited hours. And a lot of times schools aren't open on the weekends or in the evenings, so they're kind of limited with their time. But again, I do think it's a good way to get started with working on campus. Award letters. So this is the final thing you receive once you've done all the paperwork. This is it. It lists all the grants, the scholarships, and the loans the student qualifies for. I do want to tell you one thing that families fall prey to all the time. So you get your award letters and you're like, oh my goodness, I just got $20,000 to go to the school. Peace, that's where we're going. What you have to check on is how much the actual school costs. So if the school costs $70,000 and you only got $20,000 to go there, and you have a $50,000 gap, but you have an award letter here with only a $5,000 scholarship, they only cost $20,000, then again, just something to consider. And this is where I think it is vital that you call into the financial aid office or email and just say, I have my award letter. Okay, if I'm looking at this correctly, we have this much in free money, this much in grants, this much in scholarships, this much in loans, and this is our out of pocket, just to make sure you understand and see if they can offer you some guidance. Did you miss any scholarships? Did your kid really apply for the scholarships they said they applied for? They can really kind of guide you through that process to make sure that you're making the most educated decision. Oops, scholarships. So scholarships are a very important part of any financial aid package. So I'd like to remind families that you should never pay for a scholarship search. If it says pay $1,000 or pay $100 to win $1,000, you can pay $100, but you're not going to win $1,000. So definitely all valid scholarship searches, they are free. Definitely check with parent employer, student employer, with the community, your guidance office. There are a wealth of information when it comes to scholarships. And the good thing about scholarships is a lot of times they can not only be combined, but they can be matched, which really can help bring down how much you as the parents are financially responsible for. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we can go from there and figuring out what I didn't cover or what you have more questions on. Thank you.